Thank you. I want first to thank you, Randall, and the American Dream Coalition for inviting me here. It's a great occasion for me. As my English is not so fast, I start soon and I try to say all that I have to say to you. Why subsidize transit? We have a lot of theoretically good reasons. We have a social purpose, providing mobility for people who cannot afford private travel, and then we have economic and environmental reasons. We want to achieve producer and the user economies of scale, and we want to lower congestion and pollution as a second best pricing measure. My question is it true? Which benefits we have from subsidy to public transport and which cost? I will try to assess this question from an European perspective, trying to compare what has happened the last 15 years in the UK and in the continental Europe. What kind of framework for local public transport we have in Europe? We have three different systems. In Italy, Germany, we have a public-owned monopoly, and limited competition is going to be adopted. We have limited competition in France at network level, and we have two different systems in UK. In London, we have limited competition at route level, and outside London, the system has been deregulated in the 80s. And so we have deregulation, and some social services are competitively tendered. How much subsidy? As you can see, we have big difference between Great Britain and continental Europe. In our country, Italy and France have about the same population than Great Britain. Germany has a bit more. The level of subsidy for public transport is about 3 to 4 times more higher than in the UK. So a lot less subsidy for the public transport in Great Britain, but what has happened after deregulation of transit in the UK? Let's start with supply of transit. We see that after deregulation, supply of public transport has increased by 24%, while it had decreased by 22% between 1970 and 1986. No big change about accessibility. The number of households within 6 minutes of a bus stop was about 91% in 86, just after deregulation, and it was 92% in 1980. And in the rural areas, we had about 74% in 86 and 77% in 98. Frequency has increased. The number of households within at least one service every 15 minutes was 28% in 86 and 34% in 98. And the number of households with service less frequent than one in every 60 minutes was 14% in 86 and was 10% in 98. The level of subsidy has decreased greatly, but subsidy for concessionary fares has only slightly decreased, minus 13%. We have 97% of local authorities that have a concessionary fare scheme for elderly people. 48% of local authorities have a concessionary scheme for students, and then we have a lot of fare schemes widely run on a commercial basis. So these are my first conclusions. Even after deregulation, the system still satisfies the mobility needs of captive users. And then we have seen that supply has increased, and so frequency. And so we can say that the argument for subsidizing public transport in order to get user economies of scale is very weak, empirically weak. And so on the other side, we can see that much subsidy don't lead to much effective service, but we have much subsidy lead to higher cost. We have what is in literature called a leakage effect. I have considered first all the system, all the UK, because supply and accessibility is important for the urban and the rural areas. Now I focus my attention on the main metropolitan areas where the economic and environmental effects are more important. So let's consider the 4 main metropolitan areas in Great Britain that are Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Sheffield, Leeds and Newcastle, R6, not 4. I try to compare what has happened before and after deregulation. So let's consider first the number of passengers. From 1960 to 85, it has decreased by 30%. The decrease have continued after deregulation by 42%. Supply was decreasing and then had increased by 19%. The cost per bus, the unit cost was up by 26% and then has more than be halved. The cost per passenger journey was up at 52% and then slightly decreased by 5%. The fare was up by 14% before and 65% after. On the whole, public subsidy was up 41% and then decreased about 50%. And what is interesting to see is that the concessionary fare reimbursement, so money for the poor people, didn't change so much, just 1% less. But public transport support, that is the money that go directly to the companies to cover their cost, decreased by 72%. Now we have seen what has happened in Great Britain after the regulation. Now I will try to compare the situation in Great Britain with that in European countries. So let's start with the unit cost. We have the number index, and so if you have that cost, the unit cost in France is about 3 times that in Great Britain, and in Italy and Germany is 3.5 times higher and 4 times higher. The cost per passenger kilometer is about 2 times higher in continental Europe. The receipts for passenger kilometer are much higher in the UK than are in France, Italy and Germany, about twice. And so in the end, how much do we spend for transporting people? The subsidy per passenger kilometer is about 3 times higher in continental Europe than in Great Britain. We have seen the cost and receipts and subsidy. Now we see what has happened to patronage. In Great Britain, as I told before, the number of passengers decreased from 1986 to 1998 by about 40%. We have a trend like this also in Italy, while in France and in Germany the number of passengers is about the same in the last 10 years. Second, my conclusions. We see that in Great Britain public transport is much more efficient, cost per bus kilometer, has much more effective cost per passenger kilometer than in the other European countries. Then we see the subsidy per passenger kilometer is about 80% lower than in Europe, in the other countries. And so we can say that subsidy doesn't seem to be worthwhile on the ground of producer economy of scale. We have a further point to discuss. Is subsidy desirable as a second best instrument, so for lower congestion and for lower pollution, air pollution? let's start with air pollution. As Julian Simon has taught to me, the best way we have to assess a problem is to look at the longest trend we have. Unfortunately, we have not for air pollution very long trend, but I found one about Paris, and if we consider PM5, that can be considered as a good proxy for air pollution, we see that from 56 to 98, there has been a decrease by about 80% of pollution. So there has been a big improvement in the past, and even in the present. What has happened in the same British metropolitan areas we have seen before, we see that PM10 has decreased by about 7% each year from 1992 to 2000. We have no figures for the period before this one. And so the number of days when the concentration of PM10 is higher than 50 microgram per meter cube, that is one of the limits of the European legislation, has decreased very fast. But maybe this is the best graph I can show you to see how the air has improved in the UK, even without subsidy to public transport. And we see that now in the urban sites, the air quality is much better than in the rural sites, because we have ozone level in the urban sites that is lower than the rural areas. So we had in 1993 60 days with air pollution moderate or higher. Now we have only about 20 days each year. This is air pollution. The other reason, in theory, to subsidize public transport is to lower the CO2 emissions. I can speak now about global warming at deepen this issue. My point is that we don't know if the Earth is warming. We don't know if it is due to human activities, and we don't know if warming is good or bad for us. What we know is that the Kyoto Protocol is not effective. Its costs are much higher than its benefits, and that's enough for me. Anyway, we have two countries in Europe that have a very high-quality public transport system. These countries are the Netherlands and Switzerland. But if we compare the average number of kilometers by car in these two countries with the average of the EU, we see that there is no big difference, about 5 to 10% less than the average. So you can improve your transit system, but the people will use the car at the same or quasi same level. Third conclusion. The leading factor in shaping air quality is not the number of people driving their car, but it is technology. And so any realistic change of the modal split will have only a minimal impact. And it seems reasonable to draw the similar conclusion for what concerns noise pollution. And as I said before, a high-quality collective transport system does not cause any significant reduction of private car utilization, and so of CO2 emissions. Then we have two more points to address that are safety and congestion. We have good news also for safety. The mortality rate in Europe has decreased by 80% between 1970 and 1996. But we have a big difference between Great Britain and the other main European countries. The mortality rate in the UK is about 50% that we have in Germany, France and Italy. So Great Britain is doing better than the other countries, but what is more interesting is what has happened in Great Britain in the same period after the regulation. we have a lot more people driving. Passenger kilometers by private car increased according to the different areas by 32% to 78%. The number of journeys by bus decreased by 40%. The number of people killed by passenger kilometer by private car decreased between 61 and 72%, and the absolute number of people killed decreased by about 50%. For conclusion, I would say that any reduction of road casualties achievable by a modal shift from private cars to public transport would be very little if compared to the result achieved as a result of technology improvement and road safety policy, as the UK experience showed to us. And then the other point is benefits would be almost completely internalized by people changing their mode of transport. So why subsidize people to use transit if transit is safer? And the last point is about congestion. Here, probably a lot of people don't understand, don't grasp, obviously not you here, but a lot of people out there do not grasp the problem in correct terms. We have not to lessen congestion as an absolute aim. We can have no congestion with no people traveling, but that's not a good solution. Our aim is to make people traveling faster, and so we can say to decrease the average journey time of people by car and by public transport, or to increase the average speed, assuming that everyone has the same value of time. Let's see again what has happened in Great Britain after deregulation. And we considered the main urban areas. The average distance of all the journeys, except those longer than 10 miles, has increased from 5.9 to 6.1 kilometers. The average door-to-door travel time decreased from 18.7 to 17.1 minutes. But maybe more interesting is what has happened to commuting journeys, or the journeys that take place in the peak hours, so in the worst conditions. We had in 85 an average travel time by car of 16.4 minutes, and in 93 we had 17 minutes. So we had an increased congestion as worsened. We have plus 3.6%. The travel time for people using transit has decreased a little bit from 31.8 minutes to 30.9 minutes. Why? I think there are two main reasons. The supply has increased, and so we have a lot more of direct link from origin to destination than before. And then maybe a little improvement is due to less people going on the bus, so less shorter stop at the stations. But as people shift from public transport to private cars, from the to the faster mode of transport, the average travel time, the whole average travel time, decreased by about 5.6%. Some other conclusion: subsidization of public transport in order to increase the average speed of journeys through a modal shift seems not to be a policy that works. We can have another question that as not all the people have the same value of time, we can say that the richer people with a higher value of time, would subsidize people with a lower value of times. And so there could be an improvement even if the whole time of used for transportation would increase. But the problem is that if you would like to subsidize people with low value of time, you cannot achieve a bigger result, because the cross price is elasticity between the two modes is very low, about 0.1%. I will try to show you what has happened in two cases in Europe. One is in the UK, in the city of Sheffield. In 1994, a big tram system was completed. Sorry. It is made up by 3 lines that joins together in downtown. The cost of this system was about 450 million euros. And we see what was the share of people going downtown before the super tram was operating. And what has happened after is that the number of cars going to downtown increased by 2%, and nothing has changed about the number of people using super tram is very low, and many of the people using super tram was before using bus, so not much has changed. Another case, the subway in Toulouse in France, we had a cost about 500 million euros. Patronage of public transport really increased by a large amount, about 30%, but the number of people using their car didn't decrease as much. Why? Before the subway was built, people using public transport was about 20% of the whole mobility, so the increase of patronage was about 6% of all the journeys. But what is more important is that just only a quarter of new passengers was attracted away from their cars. So we have a decrease of road traffic of about 1%. That is about the increase of just 1 year. And we are at the end. I would say that subsidization of public transport seems not to be justified on the ground of economic and environmental reasons. And subsidization could be worthwhile only on social ground. But this aim can be fulfilled with a much lower level of subsidy that we have at present in Europe, and I guess also in the US. We also may do another point. How poor are the passengers of public transport? Because we know that many people using public transport are not poor, but are people going to downtown. But maybe the point for another conference. Thank you very much.